the end of World War II and before the United States could actually go in front of the United Nations to make its case for the betterment, the independence of colonized peoples, they had to make their case in Liberia, which meant that they had to really prove the benefits of self-rule in this little-known West African state that had been independent since 1847. And so the article focuses on this moment between the end of the war and the start of formal political decolonization across the African continent as it explores this history of developmentalism on a global scale. And so it does so by following these agricultural experts who made up the US economic mission to Liberia, who arrived in 1944 to support the war effort initially, but then ended up staying on until 1957. So these were Black American agricultural scientists with links to the Tuskegee Institute, who ended up advising the Liberian government on how best to grow surplus crops on a national scale. If I had to point to two key contributions, I think one would be the very basic goal of connecting Liberian historiography to a larger African historiography, because I think, it's for perhaps too long, this notion of Liberian exceptionalism has really dominated the historiography. My second contribution is really in response to ongoing discussions about inequalities in global knowledge production. The article explores and highlights both Black and African contributions to global knowledge production, you could say, with this piece. I also tried to show how the efforts of Black American experts were interlaced with this kind of emancipatory philosophy that originated with Booker T. Washington. So, I mean, I do consider myself to be a social and economic historian. And so I think on one level, this work in agricultural development was kind of complementary to my previous work on gold mining in Ghana in the late 19th and 20th century. It just kind of gave me a broader view on the history of economic development in West Africa in particular. Then on the other hand, Liberia is the place of my birth. So this project, which went on for 2 years in total, was actually the first time that I was kind of intensively studying Liberian history. Though I'd always been interested in it, I actually had the time and the resources to dedicate myself to the work. And then to be honest, I mean, I wasn't aware of this really interesting connection to the Tuskegee Institute that would emerge over time in the research. But I think it was really once I stumbled over the papers of Frank E. Pinder, who was one of the Black agricultural experts that I study in the piece, that I realized that I'd found this really interesting entry point into this lasting engagement between Black America and Liberia. After having fled Liberia with my family in 1990, for me, it was actually this project that finally brought me back to Liberia for the very first time since 1990. So that was one kind of big personal revelation for me to be back in that country and to be there in this role. My first endeavors into the archival landscape of Liberia was really eye-opening. I was able to see what was left behind, I guess, after the war. Things were destroyed, things were moved to other countries. I think after my initial visit to the National Archive, I realized at that point that the project would dedicate a lot more archival work in a lot more places to actually be able to piece together this really fascinating, really rich history. So I did spend some time at the archives at Indiana University. I stumbled over the publication by Frank E. Pinder. He published a book on his time in Liberia, and that brought me back to Tallahassee, where I'd done my BA and MA at FSU University, but I found this very rich archive at the Meek Eaton Black Archive at FAMU University. Now, I'm not aware of any other historians of Liberia actually working with this archive. And hopefully this piece will be another way of spotlighting this archive that does deserve a lot more attention as well. Well, I have to connect this to another project that I'm doing in Liberia because I've been working with the Liberia Broadcasting System to digitize their public television content from the 1980s. And one of the things that I stumbled across was a recording of Reggae Sunsplash that took place at some point in the 80s and that featured Yellow Man and Burning Spear and other amazing reggae artists. And so I organized together with Professor Tanya Garnett of the University of Liberia organized this kind of performance lecture where we talked about the tapes, talked about the concert, we talked about the history of the concert, we talked about our personal memories of the concert because it does loom very large in kind of Liberian cultural memory, I would say. And so we were both toddlers at the time that it happened, but it's just something that we keep hearing about from family members. And in her case, I think her uncle was the main one organizing the concert, and my father was the doctor in charge. And we found out about this really weird connection by chance. And for the Liberian community, I think it's this interesting moment of celebrating unity, but at the same time in the backdrop of military rule. And if you watch the tape, you could really see a lot of joy in people's faces. And I'm really intrigued by those kinds of contradictions. Well, to come back to this amazing video archive that's now coming together by the Liberia Broadcasting System, it is really this super unique archive of Black and African self-representation. And so I do want to spend a bit more time with it moving forward. I still remember when we left Liberia in 1990 and watching international news coverage about what was happening in the war and just seeing how the country and its people were kind of being ridiculed to a certain degree. So there was a lot of sensationalization about child soldiers wearing wedding dresses and cannibalism and all these kinds of discourses. And so I think there's a real opportunity here to study those two kinds of television coverages together to counter these narratives that you still find. So you still find a lot of this material on YouTube. And I think there could be a real redemptive moment behind that kind of work. And so that's what I want to dedicate some time towards in the near future.